Welcome back. Today we're continuing our discussion about aiming techniques in F-class shooting, or more specifically in long-range shooting with a scoped rifle. Today's video is going to be dedicated to the technique of holding off. If you aren't familiar with holding off, colloquially known as Kentucky windage, it's a technique wherein one leaves the windage on the rifle sights set at 0 for the distance to be shot, and then simply aims at a location other than where they intend the bullet to strike, accounting for wind drift in that aiming location. In simple terms, holding off is my primary method for aiming when conditions allow it. Before we get into the when and how of holding off, we first have to think about the scope windage setting. I said before that we needed to leave the scope set at our windage 0 for the distance being shot. The key here, and in any other technique being used for long-range shooting for that matter, is knowing your no-win 0 setting for your rifle with your ammunition. This is critical to success. I cannot tell you how many points I've gained over the last several years just because I knew where my no-win 0 was. Nor, for that matter, can I tell you how many points I've lost as a win coach or as a shooter because I did not trust my no-win 0 on that rifle. While getting a really good no-win 0 is not all that difficult, that will be the subject for a separate video after my hand heals and I'm able to shoot again. So I will leave you with this standard. You must, at all times, know your no-win 0 setting for your sights with your current load, rifle, and situation in order to be successful in shooting competition. Before the comments fill up with people asking about what I mean by situation, let me give you an example. When you go from a northern latitude to a southern latitude, the amount of Coriolis effect will change. Fortunately, most fixed ranges I have been to are oriented north and south to avoid shooting into the sun. That makes the calculations much easier. But let's move away from the Coriolis subject for now and talk about aiming using a holding off method, and more specifically why and when you would do that. The first thing to consider in choosing a holding off method is the availability of solid aim points. This is the opposite of what I gave you for conditions in my dialing video. In order to hold off effectively, you have to be able to see landmarks that you can aim at with great precision and be able to vary from those landmarks with great precision as well. In the case of F-class shooting, it is pretty simple to do. You can use the rings and the numbers on the target face as aim points. In team shooting, we get all wound up in the quarter ring increments and things like that, but in reality, if one only held whole and half rings in the black of the F-class target face, they would have every hold they needed to win every match ever fired, assuming they had an appropriate amount of windage in. So the message here is that holding off is done when you can see the target clearly. At times, when the target is very murky or the rings are indistinct due to lighting conditions, mirage, or other factors, it is best to hold on a known point and dial. In addition to having good visibility, one has to consider the wind conditions in determining whether to use a holding off method. Under wind conditions with large crosswind values, holding off may not be the best strategy. Now, I'm not saying that it can't be done with great effect. What I am saying is that it makes it more difficult to fire big scores in big winds. When there is a large crosswind blowing, I have found it much more effective to use a hybrid method, which will be the subject of the next video. Now that we've defined why and when one should leave the windage set at 0 and simply hold off, let's talk about the actual technique for doing this. When holding off for windage, it is important to understand that the wind changes are absorbed into the hold and in no other way. That turns this into a mental skills exercise. Take, for example, you are holding 4 rings right of center, right here. Now your shot lands right in the edge of the 10 ring, here. How much do you adjust your aim point to get that shot centered up? That is a question for the ages because the F-class center does not have consistent ring spacing. For example, the X ring is 5 inches wide from left edge to right edge, and the 10 ring only has 2.5 more inches from the edge of the X ring before you reach the 9 ring, which is 5 inches wide on each side like the 8 ring is. The 7 ring is 7 inches wide, and the 6 ring is 8 inches wide before you find yourself between the edge of the 6 ring and the edge of the target. This is for a long-range FC target, and that edge of the target is typically between 4 and 6 inches wide depending on who built the target. Those numbers illuminate a truth about holding off. One needs to have a method of measuring deflections in reference to the size of the rings in order to be effective holding off. If you cannot measure how much you need to move the point of aim while in the outer reaches of the target, you are left to guess how much you want to move the point of aim. Guessing works most of the time, but can lead to some undesirable consequences when tolerances stack up. Here's a technique that works for me. With this reticle, I simply note how far from some feature we are. In this case, the tip of the triangle here is in the center of the target. If I move the triangle to the mirror position of the point of impact, voila, Bob's your uncle. You have a new point of aim at about 4 3/4. Other reticles with hash marks or other features can be used just as easily, even with a second focal plane scope. That is, if you're willing to let go of the idea that the features are a certain distance apart, which makes a good argument for having a reticle with some character instead of a simple thin crosshair. While most of us can make the calculations for the next shot in our head sitting in a chair watching this video, let me tell you it isn't that easy when you're overheated, dehydrated, and really tired after several days in an unfamiliar climate. How did I learn this? I learned it at the 2017 Southwest Nationals when I gave away second place with my very last shot. That was an extremely long ride home. What I learned from that experience was that I did not know how to correct for a wind change while holding in the outer reaches of the target. The last thought is the bigger part of the why that many of us don't speak about. Let me be clear here. I'm human, and as a result, I'm stupid. What that means is that I am limited in my perception and response to those perceptions. Myself and many other shooters have a real difficult time with holding on the opposite side of the target compared to the direction the wind's coming from. It causes a great deal of anxiety, as we have all had bullets unexpectedly impact exactly where we are holding, which doesn't help our performance one bit. By leaving the windage at 0, one can walk the point of aim back and forth across the target as the wind ebbs and flows, changes angles and speeds. More importantly, it makes it possible to capitalize on that sudden calm moment for some easy X's. In summary, holding off is my favorite way to shoot F-class, and I sometimes try to use it when I really shouldn't. For me, it was helpful to create a set of standards when I would and when I would not hold off. The first part of the standard is visibility. I must be able to see exactly where I have the rifle pointed, or I don't hold off. The second part is dependent upon conditions. If the wind is light enough or the cycle of the wind allows a light enough intermittent condition, then I can simply hold off. On the other hand, if the base wind would have me holding off the edge of the target or on the outer reaches of the target, then I need to change techniques to either a hybrid system or dialing. Our next video will be about the hybrid method, which is a combination of dialing and holding. That's all I have for this video. Thank you for watching. Go ahead and get some practice, and I'll see you on the range.